Yo, welcome to my YouTube series. This is hopefully going to be the first of a 6 series videos where I will be going through different parts of raiding in World of Warcraft and different aspects of that. The 6 episodes that we have planned right now is going to be the first one today is going to be about preparing for a tier and what you can think about there. Then we're going to talk about how you progress a boss and what you do while progressing and all of that juicy stuff. We're going to look at how you can analyze your play using Warcraft logs. And then we're going to have 3 episodes focused on each of the different roles. So 1 for DPS, 1 for healing, and 1 for tanking. In raids, obviously. I want to stress that this series is about mythic raiding, and I'm going to assume that what you want to do with your raiding life is to kill the last boss as fast as possible, get that sweet cutting edge, and do it in a timely manner. Okay, let's get started. Today we're going to talk about preparing for a tier. And the 4 different things we're going to discuss is the performance equation, which is a sort of brainchild of mine, why preparation matters, how to choose a class, and how to find reliable information. Okay, without further ado, let's get going. So the performance equation is something that I've come up with to try to quantify and exemplify how we can think about our own performance. So there are 3 different steps in this. The first one is class tuning, then we have equipment and gear, and last but not least we have player skill. And you can note instantly that the first 2 are sort of technical, where we can't really affect it ourselves that much. Well, gear we can farm, but not directly, it's still going to be number crunch. Whereas player skill is a very, it's very hard for us to blame that on Blizzard or anyone else. It's just about our own performance. So let's just exemplify this a little bit so we understand what we're talking about. So class tuning, that's obviously Blizzard's job. We can't really do much other than relate to the facts and make sure we know what's going on. It's not just about what seems highest on patchwork or what has the highest healing output. It's also about different things. For example, fight design. It's really important that we look at class balancing and class tuning relative to fight designs. So how the fights are designed, how the damage intake and the damage output looks. Is it 1 target, 4 targets? All these things matter when we talk about class tuning. Gear is kind of easy to improve and affect as a player. It's very straightforward. Usually you look up what items are important for me, what's good, and you just get that. You go to the dungeon, you go to the battlegrounds, you do whatever that is. There's usually a ton of guides, and there's usually in the beginning of a tier a lot of emphasis on this part. How do I gear up quickly? What is my best covenant? What is my best? All of these things. A lot of focus on that early on. It's usually pretty time consuming. It takes a lot of time. Every dungeon takes 30 minutes maybe. Then yeah, there's a lot of time going into that. It's fun though, which is good. It's playing the game, which is great. And then we also have one more note here is that it's really important again here to sim not just on patchwork but in different setups. So we don't just focus on a patchwork sim when we look into what gear is better than another, but we also do it in different sims. So dungeon slice or hectic ad cleave or even a few patchworks if that's how the boss design works. Player skill is your personal knowledge of the class and the content in this regard. So it's basically everything. It's like how well do you know the boss mechanics? How well do you understand your class? How well do you use your utility spells? All of that stuff that is just based on you and your individual skill, that's player skill here. And player skill requires a lot of practice. It's hard and it's not always clear cut which way we need to go, but it's obviously really important. Okay, so why is this an equation? Well, we can think about this as an equation in terms that class tuning times equipment gear times your player skill will equal your performance. So with this said, performance in this case is sort of a fluffy term of what do I need in order to be as good as possible, or if you want to put it even better, like to kill a boss. So the performance equation is exponential and all 3 variables are dependent on each other. As a guild, we need to reach a critical mass of performance in order to kill a boss. So when everyone has enough gear, enough skill, and good enough classes, we're going to kill the boss. So killing a boss really quickly, for example, world first raiding, requires all 3, right? We need to have a really strong class comp. We need to have really good gear, as good as we can possibly get. That's why we see Limit and all these guys looking for split runners now. And we also need to be great players. We need to not miss many button clicks. We need to not stand in fire as much. All that stuff, right? However, it's important to note that the critical mass is also important for a guild that kills N'Zoth or the last boss Sidonathrus in this next tier 2 months after the world first raiders. So even for us in Slightly Reunited, it's important to note that all 3 things matter. you oftentimes hear the pro players saying, oh, nothing matters, like when you're 10 item levels ahead of us, well, you can just go into the boss with any class comp and just kill the boss. And that just simply isn't true, because the thing is, what they don't really think about is that our player skill is obviously a lot lower than theirs. And because of that, we need higher gear. In order to reach this critical mass of performance, we need both higher gear and better class tuning in order to make it, and the class tuning to be decent, not better class tuning, but it's still going to help us if we have a really good class tuning, even if we kill the boss a lot slower and have a lot more gear. So that's with that. So how do we sort of exemplify this, and what can we learn from this? Well, we're going to look at this. We're going to look at Shadar from the last 2 weeks, okay? So these are 3 different logs, or actually it's 3 different statistics on the average DPS done by the classes on Shadar. Shadar is a pure patchwork boss. There's not a lot of movement. It's just basically DPS over the last 2 weeks. So it's pre-patch because this is in November 2020. So it's pre-patch data, which is also a little bit iffy, but it doesn't matter. The point will still be made. So if you take a little time to just note the differences here. So on the leftmost slide, we can see the Beastmaster Hunters on the top. They fall down a little bit, but they're still up there. If we look at Arcane Mages, we can see them climbing heavily from the leftmost slide up to the rightmost slide. So this is obviously different percentiles. And just to make sure everyone understands, these percentiles work. So the 25th percentile is basically the top 75% of the players. The 50th percentile is the top 50%, and the 99th percentile is the top 1% of players. So what does this teach us? What can we learn from this? Okay, so we see Beastmaster Hunters falling down, we see Arcane Mages going up, right? We also see Feral Druids being in the bottom all the time, pretty much. Same with a few other classes down there. Frost DK is not looking good. So what can we learn from this? Well, basically what we can learn is that class tuning does matter on every level. We can see that it's about the same classes in the bottom no matter the level. No matter if you're on the top 1% or if you're in the top 75%, class tuning does matter. We can also note from this that classes are not equally difficult. If you look at Arcane Mages for example, they climb a lot of positions from the bottom list, the top list on this slide, to the bottom one where we have the top 1% players. So Arcane Mages is obviously harder. However, the most important thing that I want you guys to note here is this fact. Player skill has a much higher variance than both class tuning and gear. In this case, we don't really see the gear here, but we can say that these numbers are tuning plus gear, right? And then we have the different slides for the different skill levels. So a Feral Druid in the 99th percentile still does more average damage than a Beastmaster Hunter in the 25th percentile. So what does that matter? Well, why does that matter? Well, the top 1% Feral Druids still on average do more damage than the average top 75% Beastmaster Hunter. We can also note the numbers are a little hard to see now, but we can see that the increase in average DPS is insane. We go from like a little over 3k on most classes, or a little below even on some, up to way over 6k. So the difference in player skill on a Beastmaster Hunter is just enormous. The Beastmaster Hunters goes from like, yeah, it's more than double anyway. It's more than double damage they do. So player skill has the highest variance. And although class and gear does matter, player skill still has the highest impact on performance. And that's based on the fact that it has the highest variance. So if you look at the player community as a whole, by far the biggest variance on Mythic Raiders is going to be on the player skill area. Yes, we can look at gear and we can say, oh, these guys have a little bit better gear than us. Sure, that's true if you spend a lot of hours in Mythic Plus, especially with the old system where you get Warforged and sockets and all that stuff. That's not unimportant, but it does not affect the performance as much as your own player skill. And player skill is also the hardest to improve, but also the one with the highest reward then. And this explains why the big guilds, again, which I mentioned before, say, you know, bring the player, not the class, is this classic thing that you hear when people are sad about not being chosen because of their Raider IO score. That's true to an extent, and it is the highest variance, so player skill does matter a lot. But with that said, it's not unimportant to focus on the other ones too. If you have a really shitty class, if you're a Feral Druid, even if you're really good at a Feral Druid, you're still going to be worse than a decent Beastmaster Hunter on Shadar. And yeah, that's a bit unfortunate, right? However, again, keep in mind, these logs we saw was Shadar, that's pure patchwork. There might be other fights where other classes shine more. Okay, so with all this said, why does preparation matter then? Well, to think about why it's so important to prepare for a tier and why we can spend time before a tier, we need to kind of look at this release schedule now for Shadowlands. So in a few weeks, we're a few weeks away from the Shadowlands release on the November 27th. We have the release there. We're going to start level and have fun. On December 9th, Heroic and Season 1 opens, and then December 16th is where Mythic and higher item, Mythic plus item level is live. So why does this matter? Well, if you go back to what we said at the beginning of the video, and that the target audience for this are like you guys listening, you guys hopefully want to kill Sidon Athreus, and you hopefully want to do that as fast as possible. That's kind of why you're here, right? And then we have to keep in mind that before Mythic is released, the clock has not even started, right? All this time is just free time for us to get as prepared as possible for when the real deal starts. And you might say, okay, but we only raid once a week, or I spend a lot of times in the game not raiding, so I have a lot of time. Yeah, that might be true, and obviously that's going to help if you raid, for example, the World First Raiders as soon as after December 16th or 15th in the US. They're not going to do anything, right? They're only going to be raiding. Sure, that's not the case for you maybe, but it's still important to know that all this time before is just free time. All the way from now up until when Mythic is released, that's just all the time you spend there is just free in terms of how much it helps you to progress the tier. So it's very important to take this opportunity to make sure we spend this time wisely. And when we talk about spending time wisely, we can talk about a concept that I think is really good, and you can use this in life or in WoW or whatever, and that's a focus meter. And focus meter for me is a way to quantify my time spent in life. I can think about this as my life. I can think about this 100% as an hour, a meeting, 1 day, 1 week, and yeah, whatever. Let's say it's a week. So during a normal week, maybe we sleep for 30% of the time. Then we at work, or we're at the uni, or whatever, high school, whatever we're doing during our daytime, out of work, that's good. Then we have more time for WoW. We do spend a lot of times with friends and family, all of that stuff. And then we have a little bit of time, well, 20% our focus maybe, we spend on World of Warcraft. So it's important to note that you can take anything in life and just apply this concept to kind of realize that, okay, we might be talking a lot about World of Warcraft and thinking a lot about World of Warcraft, but it's still sort of a small part of our lives still. Okay, so let's break this down, because we said we could break it down in hours and in weeks and whatever, but we can also just break it down and say, okay, World of Warcraft, what can we do in World of Warcraft? And there's a lot of different things we can do while we're focused on World of Warcraft, while we're talking about it or playing it or whatever. We can farm pets, transmog. Right now there's a lot of emphasis on like, what am I playing in Shadowlands? Choosing a class is big. We can look at boss guides and dummy training. And although this is really, really important and it's a good way to like conceptualize it, the thing that we need to think about is like this 100% is a very set amount of time. Some of us play World of Warcraft for maybe 10 hours a week. Some of us played for 2 hours a week, maybe 40 hours a week. There's a lot of different things there, right? But no matter how much time you spend, if you want to perform, if you want to maximize your performance, you need to think about how am I spending the time that I put focus on. Because I have 80% of my life I'm spending on other stuff. So once I'm actually focused on World of Warcraft, what do I do with that time? That's a really important question. And the question then becomes, what is the most time efficient thing to do in order to perform? And why preparing is important is because we need to identify this, right? We need to prepare for a tier in order to identify what's the most time efficient thing to do. And the thing is, unfortunately, there's not a clear-cut answer to this. I won't be able to tell you, oh, you should do exactly this. Yeah, maybe we can say that Torghast, for example, is going to be relevant. During the tier, it's going to be important that we actually do Torghast to get our legendaries going, and you can get some guides like that from your guild or from Wowhead or Icy Veins or whatever. But it's really important to note that you have to think about this yourself, because this is very individual. For me as a raid leader, going through logs after the first heroic week, watching the race to world first, those things are huge for me. They're so important. They're maybe more important than anything else, because it's a very time efficient way for me to get an idea of what I want to do on the different bosses and what strategies we'll be using, and making sure those are the best strategies and all of that. If you're playing a completely new class and you're not really used to this, maybe you used to heal and now you're DPSing and you're playing a class you've never played before, dummy training and reading guides might be super time efficient for you. It's super important for you to make sure you know that. For me, if I choose to play my Shadow Priest, which I haven't played since Legion, I'm gonna have to spend more time on that sort of stuff, like focusing on my player skill, my individual class skill, how good am I at clicking the buttons. That's going to be important for me. However, if I keep going with the Beastmaster Hunter, which I've been playing for all of 8.3 and most of 8.2, the differences aren't that big. I feel very confident with the rotation. I know the different things I need to think about during the rotation. Sure, there's going to be some new Covenant abilities and stuff, but it's going to be pretty quick for me to learn those. And to maximize that, maybe that's not the best thing for me. Maybe I should focus instead of learning the bosses then. So think about, okay, where am I in the performance equation? What do I need to focus the most on? And then, okay, how can I be as time efficient as possible on focusing on that? What is the most time efficient thing I can do in order to perform? We have 2 more questions to answer here, and the first one is going to be how to choose a class. This is going to be a little bit more just exemplify some things, but I know that both how to find reliable information and how to choose a class is really important questions that a lot of people ask, so we're going to go through those briefly as well. So when we choose a class, the most important, most obvious thing maybe is to look up information on them. We need to know what type of like strengths and weaknesses they have, and are they simming good, how are they looking on the beta, stuff like that. Very important, obviously. Am I enjoying the rotation? Might also be an important factor. We also need to think about fight design and how that impacts your choice. So I think this is one of the least, like the most forgotten things in choosing a class is like, okay, maybe we look at the beta testing, we do some research, we see, okay, this class is really good at patchwork. Yeah, but then we look at the hard bosses in the tier and we're like, yeah, none of these are patchwork. Maybe one of the hardest bosses in the tier, obviously this is all speculation, we don't really know, but maybe one of the harder bosses in the tier is going to be the Kel'Thas fight. That's a lot about AoE. Is my class good at AoEing? No, maybe it's shit at AoEing. Okay, maybe that's a problem. Of course, if you happen to get the highest single target sustained damage dealer in the game, that's almost never going to be a bad choice. But if you're looking at someone and you're like, okay, I like this class a lot, his 5th is looking to be like still a good single target DPSer, patchwork DPSer, but he might not be good at AoEing at all, like try to think about that. Try to allow that to impact your choice. Can I handle different situations? Maybe different content. Do you like doing PvP? Do you like doing Mythic Plus? Think about that. Consider the time you need to put in to get good at the class. This is also very important. There's a big strength in going with something you played before, because it takes time to get confident playing a class. It takes hours of not just dummy training, but also being in a raid, being in Mythic Plus, doing all these things, learning the small things you can do, when to use the utility spells, how can you use the utility spells, all these niche little things that really pushes you ahead of the rest of the pack. Those take time to learn, so consider if it's worth spending that time on a new class if you already played something and it's still looking pretty decent. And also keep in mind that you have to prepare more than one character. Well, you don't really have to, but if you want to be safe, if you're worried about your class choice, prepare more than one class. Usually, and for most people, for some people, like the Limit Raiders, they're gonna need to be really well geared on 3 characters maybe, and they're gonna be able to bash those. If they make a wrong choice there, we can see on Zul, for example, we had some undergeared rogues for Method back in Uldir, because, oh shit, they weren't ready for having to play rogues there, so they didn't have enough rogues ready. So same was actually with Khun there, where we saw some warlocks that did not have great gear. For most guilds in the world, you're gonna be able to choose to change your class early in the tier. You're still gonna be able to get all that heroic gear that your guild doesn't really need. So don't put too much emphasis on this choice. It's not a do or die choice. And just level 2-3 characters, see what happens, what you feel confident with, what you feel like you can perform with, and then go with that choice. Next and last question is, how do we find reliable information? And to be frank, like, where do we look? Well, it's all about source criticism. Who said it? That's the most important thing. If we look at what the Limit Raiders are saying and we think that they're trying to make a valid point and not just trolling on Twitter, well, that's really good information, right? Because the source is very reliable. Class discourse are generally a really good place to start for this, and it's also a place where you can ask your own questions. However, be mindful of who is answering, because it might not always be the best player that answers your question, and then you're sort of back to the same problem where, the source might not be reliable. But class discords are great, and in the description section of the video, I'll link all the class discords if you happen to not have them. Stalk the pros on Twitch, look at what they're doing, look at what classes they're playing, look at what comps they're playing, look at what they seem to be focusing on. You can get a lot of information if you have a lot of time doing this, just having Twitch on your other screen. Look at what they're focusing on. They're going to play the characters they're going to raid with. And then last but not least, and this is literally the most important thing, ask someone who's better than you. If that's on Discord, if that's in your guild, just ask someone who's better than you for help, and they will give you good information. So summary. Use the performance equation to identify where you need to put your most emphasis. Try to think about those things. Class tuning, gear equipment, and player skill. Where do I need to focus? Well, most of the times the answer is going to be player skill. Sometimes it's going to be I need to focus a lot on gear. But if we look at the beginning of the tiers, we often see people spamming dungeons to get that one piece of extra gear and never doing dummy training. And that's usually not a good time efficient thing. Like, and then you go into the raid and you're like, oh shit, I don't know my rotation. Sure, I've done Mythic Plus, but it's like just AoEing, and I don't really min-max that either. I do 10s or 15s. It's not that hard. So think about where you can put your where you should put your most emphasis. Think about the focus meter here and actively choose what you spend your time on. Maybe half an hour dummy training a day is worth it. Maybe it's not. Maybe you should spend more time in Torghast. Maybe getting that legendary 1 week before feels like the most efficient thing you can do. Think about efficiency. Don't get stuck on the choice of class. Be flexible instead. Don't think about it that way. Think about it, I want to play a ranged DPS class. Okay, that's good. Then think about maybe 2-3 different classes that you feel, okay, this might be fun. Read up a little bit, don't do too much research, and then once you settle into that choice, that can be 2 weeks into Mythic for some. Like, sure, you start raining Mythic, but the first bosses are pretty easy. It takes time for most guilds to get to the later, harder bosses. So be flexible there and be very, very active. If you feel during the first heroic week, this does not feel good. I don't see any of the good players playing this class. I don't feel confident playing it. I'm going to go back to what I used to play last year. Well, do it. If your raid leader says you're an idiot, well, that's him being an idiot or her. So, yeah, don't mind that. And then obviously look up as much information as possible before a tier, because this will allow you that once the tier is released and once we start clearing bosses and progressing that, you're going to be able to do more fun and better tasks with your focus. You're going to be able to focus on doing Mythic Plus with a higher item level or whatever, instead of having to then go back and start looking up bosses and whatever. Try to think about that. What can I do before a tier? What can't I do? Where do I put my focus? Okay guys, this video got a few minutes longer than I'd hoped for, but still hopefully short enough for you to have time to listen and settle down this. It's been quite a bit of job, quite a bit of work to actually get this done, and I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, have a good time. See you guys.